So, what kind of crazy university would teach a class in science fiction? Let me tell you about that. Hey, Patrick with 52 Books here. As always, if you like this sort of content, please use the buttons down there to like and subscribe, because it will help the artificial intelligence overlords figure out how to show this video to more people. And come check us out on Facebook also. All right, guys, so when I was in college, 25 some odd years ago, a long time, huh? How does time fly that fast? But when I was in college, I got to a point where I was searching for a humanities elective. So I searched through the catalog and found a class in science fiction literature where you read cool science fiction books and write essays about them. So I signed up, and it turned out to be pretty cool. I figured today on this video I would tell you about the books that we read during our science fiction class. So the first book that we read in science fiction class in college was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and I think most of us have read that either in school or just because it's cool. I think my favorite scene from the whole thing is the scene where he meets the blind man, and the blind man cannot tell that Frankenstein's monster is supposed to be evil because he's ugly, because the blind guy can't see him. The whole book is about good and evil, and sort of how that's an arbitrary thing. Also in science fiction class, we read a set of books as a class, but then we would read some things on our own, or we would choose our own things. While we were doing Frankenstein, I also did Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, because it's along the same lines. It's about the nature of evil and what makes a guy evil. So that was the beginning of our science fiction class. Next, we got into Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. This was sometime in the early to mid 1800s, and I think Verne came a little bit earlier than H.G. Wells. If I remember correctly, from 20 something years ago, and I may not, because my brain might not be wrinkly enough to retain all that stuff all these years later. But if I remember right, Verne and Wells did not care for each other's literature. They didn't like each other, and they didn't appreciate the things that each other wrote. Turns out that they wrote in two different styles that have come to be known as hard science fiction and soft science fiction. Jules Verne would be the representative of hard science fiction, being stories about technology and the cool devices and ships and that sort of thing. The H.G. Wells would have been the representative for the soft, which is stories about how technology affects people. So it's more subjective, more psychological. So we read Time Machine and War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and we read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Here's you a piece of trivia. Do you know how far a league is? A league is, it sort of varies depending on your definition of a mile, and over time that definition of a mile has changed. So, but it's about 3 miles. So 20,000 leagues would be 60,000 miles. The ocean's not 60,000 miles deep. Well, it turns out that that's not what the title's referring to. It's referring to a trip 60,000 miles worth of traveling while under the sea. And 60,000 miles would equate to a trip of about 1.5 times around the Earth. So the title is saying that this guy traveled in a remarkable underwater ship 1.5 times around the Earth. At some point during our science fiction class, we got to Herbert's Dune, which is, of course, a classic. It's a magnificent book. It's grandly ambitious because the story takes place like tens or even hundreds of thousands of years in the future. So it's really a sort of a science fantasy story, because y'all remember Arthur C. Clarke's, one of his laws is that any sufficiently advanced technology seems like magic. So the projections in Herbert's Dune is being so far in the future, the technology is basically magic. So Dune is a wholly remarkable book that has been turned into movies several times and has become really a cultural icon, a piece of cultural literacy. Okay, so at some point in the science fiction class, we got into dystopias, and a couple of the dystopias that we did included Anthem by Ayn Rand. That's not one that a lot of people associate with Ayn Rand. They think Fountainhead or whatever. But Anthem is a dystopia, and one of the things that recommends Anthem to you is it's really short, whereas Fountainhead and all the others are these hefty tomes that you have to have a hernia belt to carry around the book with you. Anthem is a short, straightforward tale about some folks that have been oppressed for so long that they've lost the concept of the individual. They don't know what I am. So they're all about the collective. And the main character falls into a underground cavern or something and finds a thing that will concept that will wind up threatening his life and his girlfriend's life and all of the society. We also did Fahrenheit 451. That's another famous one by Ray Bradbury. Dystopian novel about firemen whose jobs it is to burn books. I think most everybody has either seen the movies or has read the books. Another story that was a fix-up, that is, it was short story before it was a novel, and the story has been adapted into numerous film adaptations, is Flowers for Algernon. Sometimes it's been titled Flowers for Charlie. This is I think probably the strongest influence for the movie and the story Lawnmower Man, if you remember that one. Flowers for Algernon is about a mentally handicapped fellow who the doctors experiment on to make him vastly intelligent and how that changes his life and how it destroys his life when he reverts to his previous low intelligence. While we were in science fiction class in college, we also did A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter Miller. This was a fix-up book, which means it the sections of it, the chapters, had previously been published as short stories. And I seem to recall that he won some awards for the short stories, but then he pulled all these short stories together and massaged them a little bit and republished it as a novel. Canticle for Leibowitz is a post-apocalyptic novel that takes place after some probably thermonuclear war has ravaged everything. It takes place in the American West, like Utah, in the desert, in a nuclear wasteland, basically. But it's also vastly ambitious because it takes place over the course of like 1,800 years. And the first section is about one fellow soon after the apocalypse, and the next section is about some people 600 years later, and the next section's 600 years later. So it's ambitious, in my opinion, to try to tell a story that lasts 1,800 years. Miller pulled it off, and it was fantastic. So they called this class Intro to Science Fiction, but they should have probably called it Intro to Speculative Fiction or something like that, because we also dabbled in fantasy. Now the fantasy novel that they had us read was Ursula K. Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea, which is like one of my favorite fantasy stories ever. Story of a young man. Ursula K. Le Guin was years ahead of her time. She has this young man attend a wizard's college, like, I don't know, 40 years before Hogwarts was thought up. But he has to meet all these people and learn his magic stuff, and he has to grow and deal with some severe limitations in his own personality that threaten his life and the lives of others, and potentially could wreck this world. So that's what Wizard of Earthsea is about. All right, the last book that I want to talk about is, in my personal opinion, my least favorite of everything that I read. And it's odd because it comes from one of my most favoritist authors, and that's another Ursula K. Le Guin. We did Left Hand of Darkness, which a lot of the students thought was remarkable and touching, and I didn't get it. I totally missed whatever. Maybe one day I can reread that and be as touched as the people in the class said that they were by Ursula K. Le Guin's. It's probably her most famous, most beloved. Wizard of Earthsea is probably like second class for a lot of people, whereas a lot of people's favorite would be Left Hand of Darkness. All right, guys, so that's been a quick review of Intro to Science Fiction from 20 some odd years ago at Mississippi State University. I had a blast in the class. Most all of the books have stuck with me and provided me years worth of thinking and entertainment. Several of them I have reread and maybe even read again. So as always, if you enjoy this sort of content, please like and subscribe using the buttons down there, and come over to Facebook and check us out. Do a search for 52 books on Facebook, and there's frequently some shorter textual reviews and discussion there.